Welcome to Unboxing Logistics. I'm your host, Lori Boyer, and today we are going to be diving into a little bit of topic that we are all over in the news lately. We're going to be talking de minimis. I have brought on Kate Muth. She is the executive director of IMAG, and she's going to be talking to us about what's going on with de minimis, what are we seeing as of now. As we know, things are changing a lot with tariffs and de minimis and all of those good things. So this is going to be a great discussion for everyone. Kate, though, will you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience?
Absolutely. I am Kate Muth. I am the executive director of the International Mailers Advisory Group, or IMAG, as most folks know us. I got my start in this industry maybe 30 years ago. I was a trade reporter, actually, covered the Postal Service, covered the business of mailing and shipping for about 10 years. And then kind of moved over to the association side of the house, and so I've written on postal and logistics topics for many years, and really have found my home here in the international space, which I really enjoy. I have great members, and as we're going to discuss today, there's always something new going on.
There is always something new going on. In fact, this is a little sneak behind the scenes sort of peek here for our community. We actually had recorded this episode and we're re-recording it because there have been changes since then. That's how quickly things do happen and things change. So giant shout out to Kate for doing coming back and sharing the latest updates with us. Kate, so as part of our season, we've been doing a couple of fun little segments that I have loved. One of them is what we call AI reality check. I'm just asking experts to give us a little bit of a grade. I'm asking ChatGPT a question that's kind of in your domain, and I'm letting you kind of grade and see how well did ChatGPT do. So far, I had to say this season, kind of hitting a pretty good B plus. So that's not bad. So, Kate, I have asked ChatGPT about what it thought were the biggest misses, the biggest failures in international mailing and shipping over the last 5 years. Okay, so it gave me three top ones it feels like were the biggest, oopsies. So I'm interested to hear what you say on what it said. So the first one it said was USPS's slow rollout of its international e-commerce. It said that while other carriers kind of expanded their international e-commerce aggressively, USPS struggled a little bit with its international delivery times, tracking, customs. Okay, so that was one. Two, it said Brexit. It said all of the shipping issues around Brexit caused a lot of chaos that was just really not thought through well. And three was China's de minimis loophole, which interestingly enough is what we're going to talk about. Kind of that surge in Shein and Temu and sort of the issues around that. So it listed those as the three kind of big misses in the last 5 years. Agree, disagree? Where do you feel, Kate?
I mean, I think certainly Brexit and the sort of impact that had, because that really did go across the entire European Union, right? You're leaving the European Union, so it's not just what's going on in the UK, it's what the effect was for the European Union countries, and for those of us who were shipping to the UK when it was part of the EU and now it's not. So, right, I think that one's a pretty good it hit right on the target. I don't know about the Postal Service and international e-commerce. The Postal Service is just, I know the Postal Service is the largest, postal service in the world, post in the world, but they're not really that big in international. They really are quite small in comparison to La Poste, Deutsche Post, B Post even. So smaller countries actually have a bigger presence in international e-commerce. So that one, that seems a little niche to me.
I totally agreed with that. I just had to say, Kate, I was like, really? Okay, so go on.
So that one I don't know about, but not to say Postal Service couldn't do more in international e-commerce, but it doesn't strike me as one of the biggest things for the last 5 years. I would say that, of course, the China and just the surge in e-commerce, not just into the U.S., but all around the world, and how customs authorities have had to adapt, make changes. You've seen it not just here in the US, but other countries changing their value added tax, taking it down to zero, or changing the duties and taxes that they put on goods coming from China. So I think, yeah, that one. And just the rise of Temu and Shein. I mean, they've grown so quickly. You see it in certain recent survey results that, they were maybe just a blip a few years ago, and now they're right up there with Alibaba and Amazon. So, right, that's pretty remarkable.
Okay, so what would you give it as its grade overall? A to F.
Yeah, I think they got 2 out of 3, right? And although that Brexit's sort of a broad target, I would give it maybe C plus B minus.
I agree. I wasn't that impressed with its answer on this. So that's an interesting sort of insight there as we get into some of these more complex topics. Sometimes maybe too broad, too generic. It didn't go that well. So get your answers from people like Kate, not like ChatGPT on things like this. Okay, Kate,
Exactly.
exactly. Something else we've been doing this season is I've been asking people to share a person or multiple people or even a role of somebody you really admire in the industry. I've loved this topic. So, Kate, who is somebody who's influenced you or that you just really admire in the industry?
There's so many, and you always risk when you say name and you don't say another, but I'm going to say one name, which is Shoshana Grove. She is the CEO of International Bridge. She comes from she worked at the Postal Service. She worked for the Postal Regulatory Commission, and now she's been CEO of International Bridge for maybe, I don't know, 8, 9 years. So she's been on all sides of logistics. But she is one of those people. As much as she knows, she's always a student of the industry, and she's kind of taught me that even when you think you know it all, there's still more to learn. But she's also a champion for women in logistics and in postal and in government. She is the co-chair of the Women in Logistics and Delivery Services, which is an organization that supports women in our industry. And I think I mentioned this when we recorded last time. She knows everyone, but she's so welcoming to newcomers, and she knows the best places in DC to uh, have a meal, and she knows all of the restaurateurs. So she's just a wonderful. She's a friend, she's a colleague, and I just admire the heck out of her. So.
I love it. In a way, it kind of connects the fact that she's an always learner. She has her this great base of knowledge, but she's always open to new ideas. It's similar in the way that you said, while she knows everybody, she also welcomes new people. It's interesting to see those two things. Basically, it's the same characteristic, and both help in the relationships and in the knowledge. So fantastic. I love that. Shout out to her. Okay, let's get into the meat of our conversation. De minimis. Okay, so Kate, I'm here for it. First of all, if we have some, maybe we've got some small e-commerce shipper and they're not quite aware of de minimis. What is de minimis? What does it mean when you're shipping things across borders?
Right. So de minimis in that regard is essentially the value under which goods can come into the U.S. free of duties and without having to be, through the formal entry process. And I'll just say something because you actually used a word earlier when we talked. I want to note that de minimis. It's called the de minimis exemption. So you're exempt from duties, and it's not a loophole. It's actually a core U.S. trade policy. So it is. I know that gets thrown around a lot. You see it in headlines, but it's actually it's U.S. trade policy, and it's actually based on sort of sound economic underpinnings that goods can be shipped quickly and affordably. They can have something of a streamlined process for entry, and that benefits U.S. businesses. It benefits the American consumer, and it includes those businesses that may be like a manufacturer that gets their intermediary goods from another country, comes into the U.S., and then it's manufactured here in the U.S. So
Great point.
I just wanted to straight say that because even when all of this was happening with the tariffs and briefly losing the de minimis exemption, you saw a lot of those headlines in the papers, and so I just thought I would say that.
No, I love that. So loophole gives us this impression that it was an oversight, right? And that we somehow didn't know. But the exemption is this is specifically made out as part of our trade policy and makes a lot of sense. And I would assume then, Kate, countries throughout the world have their own de minimis exemptions, correct?
Right. So countries around the world, and we are a little bit of an outlier, the US is, because ours is so high. It's $800. So just to get back to the definition a little bit, it's anything coming into the US to a single person or a single address, one person one day, or one address one day. So it's anything under $800. And of course, in the e-commerce world, a lot of direct to consumer products are way below $800. And so you've seen other countries have a de minimis, whether it's for duties. They may have two different ones. They may have one on their value added tax in the European Union, and then there's a separate, slightly higher one for duties. Countries around the world have lowered their de minimis for some of the reasons we hit on at the very beginning, which is that so much has come in from China. And, there's other reasons too. There's economic reasons, there's protectionist reasons, there's security reasons. It's for a variety of reasons where countries have set their de minimis levels. But in the US, ours is quite high. And I think that's probably why folks, look at it sort of differently from what the rest of the world is doing or has moved towards.
Okay, so ours is 800. If we were comparing some of the other numbers, do you know offhand, Canada or some of the EU or anything?
Canada is $40 for taxes and $150 for duties. It's slightly lower through the postal channel. I think it's $20 for taxes. Into the European Union, it's the value added tax is essentially zero. It's at the first euro you pay value added tax, but their de minimis on duties is not until 150 euro. And I think Mexico, I'm going to get mixed up. I want to say it's like $50. Some of that, Mexico and Canada, of course, also are what's in the USMCA in the NAFTA 2.0 agreement. So, again, countries can have bilateral agreements as well, or they can have, trade agreements where that may be set. And then you have like places like Australia and New Zealand that have a goods and services tax, and they apply that the ship or the marketplace or the platform is the one who's responsible for collecting it and paying. And there's a threshold of revenue of like say 75,000 Australian dollars before you even have to collect and pay it. So countries have all set it somewhat differently. They have maybe different mechanisms for applying it, but yes, it's different around the world.
Okay, so Kate, what kind of goods then are typically, if we're focused back on the United States, what type of goods typically do we see falling under this exemption? Are they really specific, industries or types, or does it cross all the industries?
I think it crosses a lot of industries, but I think you can find clues from, for instance, some of the surveys or IPC, the International Post Corporation, does an annual cross-border e-commerce survey, and it kind of ranks what the most purchased online goods are. It's a survey of the consumers, and you see a lot of electronics, a lot of apparel, beauty and makeup goods like that. Certainly, I see a lot of times as example things like your iPhone case or your phone case, jewelry, things like that. It's a lot of the stuff that we buy online, and maybe it changes a little bit year to year, but generally you see those handful of categories that are most common. And of course, when you think about Temu and Shein, the fast fashion is a big part of it as well. A lot of that's coming in, but really it's a whole lot of things. Anything a consumer can buy online, but not just that, it's also, as I said, if you're a business and perhaps you need something for your own manufacturing needs or your own production needs, that can come through the de minimis exemption as well.
Okay, so then let's talk about it from that standpoint. What's going on with it? Interestingly, I had an experience. I went to get my hair done with my hairdresser, and she has a side business where she sells like balloons and that kind of stuff. And she mentioned that she had just been in a panic as a small business owner, but she gets all of her, mylar balloon things from Canada. And she was worried about some of these issues and some delays in the border, as well as what was going to happen, and was asking all these things. I don't know what's going on, and what am I supposed to do, and is this going to ruin my business if this goes away? And she was asking me, knowing I work in the logistics field. So I think that's kind of our audience for some of those people out there. What is going on? They're not sure what it is. Can you give us kind of an overview? What is sort of the climate of what's going on with de minimis when it comes to legislation, when it comes to President Trump. What is the state right now?
Well, that is, if I can answer that succinctly or on the nose, I can probably play the numbers or something. But well, there's so much going on. You're right, and it is tied in with the tariff situation because if you remember, in early February when the Trump administration put the tariffs, initially they were going to be on Mexico and Canada, then we got a pause, but he did implement the additional 10%
Mm-hmm.
on China. And initially, when those took effect, part of that executive order was you can no longer use de minimis. The de minimis exemption was going away. So everything that was coming in would pay duties and taxes and the new tariff. And so what happened, of course, was I mean that was turned on, but this 2 or 3 days later that got turned on, and so that's just like way too suddenly. It overwhelmed CBP. We discovered that the Post Service briefly said we aren't going to take anything from China or Hong Kong because the Post Service doesn't really have a mechanism to collect duties and taxes. And there is also through the postal channel, country of origin, that data element is not a requirement. It's just optional. So you can't even 100% tell, where it came from. So there were a lot of glitches right off the bat. And I think because it impacted, and of course, then it was impacting small businesses, it was impacting
Yes.
big businesses. CBP was overwhelmed. One article said they got something like 1 million packages stacked up at JFK. So the president came out with an updated executive order and said, we will reinstate de minimis exemption until an effective mechanism for collecting the duties and taxes can be in place, and then the Commerce Secretary has deemed that that's acceptable. So we're still in that period of de
Mm.
minimis is still allowed. We've got the tariffs with Canada now on some things, and some things with Mexico that aren't covered by the USMCA, and then there's retaliation, and we're going to have some expecting tariffs with the European Union in April 1st. So the de minimis piece of it, I believe, at least with the European Union as well, will continue to have the de minimis exemption on things coming from the EU, just because there are some of these sort of, say, technical aspects or practical aspects of it that have to be sorted out. I think that is still a work in progress, and there are two. So one other thing to note is that there's two rulemakings that Customs and Border Protection has issued. They issued them it was actually in the waning days of the Biden administration. They pushed out these two rulemakings that had been in the works for a number of years. And the first one is about, it's looking to ensure that illicit narcotics aren't coming through,
Mm.
to ensure that we're not allowing counterfeits, that people, it's really to protect the citizen. So the first one is to collect more data and kind of enhance the data elements that are being collected. And then a second rulemaking proposes eliminating de minimis on any goods that come what they're called Section 301, Section 201, or Section 232 goods. And so these are goods that the first Trump administration put tariffs on, and the Biden administration kept it on them. So those were the first, and those were just addressed mostly to China.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're good. So there were some concerns with de minimis that we were getting some narcotics, some security issues, some counterfeit items that were slipping under the radar, correct? With the de minimis exemption. So they put on some additional rules to kind of help with that. And that was a data collection and eliminating on some of those specifics, the 301, 201, 232. Am I getting this right, Kate?
You're getting it right, except they're proposed rules. So
They're
they're not actually in
proposed.
place. They're proposed. So,
Okay.
and I hope maybe I didn't state that clear enough, but it's a notice of proposed rulemaking, which is the
Okay.
first step in the rulemaking process. And
Okay.
this is a little confusing, but the rulemaking process is actually the way that usually these things are done. It's not like we're going to have a tariff tomorrow. And by the way, de minimis is gone.
Yeah.
That's not usually how businesses adjust very well. So the rulemaking process is such that what has occurred is CBP, Customs and Border Protection, has put forward proposed rules. It has given, we have until next week on the
Next
one rule.
week.
to submit comments. So
Okay,
we've had
so
about
what do you have the date for that? March?
March 17th, the comments are due. Just the comments are due
Okay.
for the data one. And for the one that's kind of, I refer to as the trade and national security one, which has really more to do with the de minimis exemption being removed on certain goods.
Mm-hmm.
That date is March 24th for the comments are due. And in the traditional rulemaking process, you submit, it allows for interested parties, any stakeholder, for any citizen to submit comments. You can do it very easily online. There's already a bunch of comments that have been submitted. We'll submit ours in the next couple of days, and then usually how it works is the government agency goes through all the comments, considers the impact, and then issues some time later, and there's no set time, but generally a month, 2 months later, they'll issue a final rule. And within that final rule, they'll probably adjust some of the proposed rule, and they usually set an implementation date sometime in the future. And the beauty of the proposed rulemaking process or the rulemaking process is you get to comment on the proposed rule, you get to weigh in with impacts to your particular part of industry, or if you're a citizen, or however you want to comment, you comment. It's usually taken into consideration in the final rule, and then you are given some lead time to implement because none of these things, it's going to take some adjustment period. And that's generally how the rulemaking process has played out.
And Kate, can our audience themselves go in and comment? Like if they're a small business owner or whatever, they're allowed to comment on that process
They're
as
allowed to
well.
comment, and if you go in and
Great.
look at and it's super easy to do because you can just do it online through a link from the proposed rule, and I'd be happy to send that to you after we
Perfect.
talk. And you can even see the public comments that are already been posted, and many of them are from small businesses, from individual citizens, and it's fine. Like I'm going to tell my members, I've already told them, use ours as a template. If you want to use the
Yeah.
exact same thing, stick your name on it, or you want to just take a section and expand on it. I mean, this is how you make your voice heard. This is how and if you've ever done if anybody's followed any part of the rulemaking process, you may get 200 of the exact same sort of template, but it still matters because it shows that this is something that's important to your business, to your, community or whatever it is.
And I just want to, I was going to say, I want to add to that, Kate. I tend to be the person who thinks like, oh, my voice doesn't matter. I'm just one person. And that is so not true. I do think that in general, our leaders try to listen, especially when they see more and more people who are commenting and sharing their thoughts. I had an experience some years ago where I was just whining and complaining about a street light in my city that was not working right. And I complained and complained to my friend, and she just wrote the city and they went send someone out to fix it the next day. And I was like, oh my word, I'm just whining. And so ever since then, I thought, do reach out. People actually are listening, and sometimes we forget. So I love that, Kate. I will get that link from you and share it here with the episode. That's great.
I don't want to get hopes too high because this is an unusual sort of situation, but you're right. And the other thing about that is if you don't comment, they can always point and say, well, nobody commented. Why are we even having a comment period? And you hate for that to be, eliminated in the future, or that pointed to as a reason that something didn't change. I think the difficulty with this one is that you have the rulemaking process that's going on around something that's been in the works, and there's been a lot of work done both from the industry side and Customs and Border Protection on this topic to try to get to this rulemaking. And then you have what the administration is doing around the tariffs. And I just hope we
Mm-hmm.
aren't sort of overrun by events, that this rulemaking will get the deliberate and thoughtful process that it really deserves.
I see. So when we just have an executive order like that, though, then like what happened the first time, it just kind of shut it down, and we sort of saw we hadn't thought through everything, and there was a little bit of chaos around that. Is that what you're saying?
There's a lot of chaos, and it's hard to make those changes so quickly, right? And it's not good for businesses who, especially for supply chains that are sort of dependent on having some process in place, and making a change and then undoing it and then changing it a month, or a week later is just difficult. And it's difficult on the end consumer. It's difficult, and it's on the business and on the supply chains. And I just think it's one of those things that we probably, when you could have a more deliberate process to it, it will also ensure that more and more people are ready to do it, and it was difficult on CBP. I mean, to have a million packages coming in or stacking up, there aren't places to stack these things up. It's just like we got to keep commerce moving. So
Yes, absolutely. So I know the tariffs are paused until I think April 2nd. When those are unpaused, is that also going to unpause de minimis? Are they connected to that currently?
had been connected because the original executive order included that de minimis exemption was going away, but those executive orders have since been updated with amendments to the executive orders. So de minimis exemption, I believe, will stay in place until such time as the Commerce Secretary and CBP and the Postal Service and anyone else can put in place a mechanism to collect the tariffs in a way that doesn't hold up, commerce.
Okay, so how are companies responding to? So let's say the de minimis exemption does go away or is altered or changed, the amount shifted. What do businesses need to do? Let's start with people like Shein and Temu. I know I had all kinds of friends and family rushing to buy a whole bunch of Shein and Temu goods before they felt like maybe it was going to go away. What are we seeing in the industry? How are people responding?
I think Timu and Shein they saw this coming, right? And they've already made adjustments where they're putting warehouses in the United States and getting those probably in the places that get closer to the final mile delivery points. Strategically placing warehouses in the U.S. so that things don't have to come through the de minimis entry; they come as cargo shipments or whatever it is. So I think again, this is what's made them so successful too, right? They can adapt and they are adapting their supply chains. I think others will look to do that, but if you're a smaller business, you maybe don't have that luxury. I think what you probably want to do is rely on technology partners, rely on service providers to kind of help. And there's a lot of trade and compliance tools out there. A lot of my members, I mean, Easy Post and et cetera, you're all in this space of providing the tools that helps to make it as easy as possible and as seamless as possible for companies to do cross-border shipping. And I think that is going to be such an important part. It already is. You're trying to make the cross-border experience as close to a domestic experience as possible, because if you don't, then people stop buying from overseas, and international e-commerce maybe isn't as attractive. So I think cross-border e-commerce has done really well in terms of speed and delivery options and all of those things, where it is so similar to the domestic experience. But if we can't kind of figure out how to smooth out this de minimis situation, I think that hurts the international e-commerce community a bit.
Yeah, I loved where you said that the cross-border experience should be as close to a domestic experience as possible. That was mic drop. That is something I hadn't really thought. Loved that, Kate. So true. What we want is that smooth, easy experience. And I keep thinking of my hairdresser and her purchasing a cross-border as a small business. So she can rely, should she be looking to trade organizations like you, to her, you said technology people like Easy Post somewhere, I guess any other practical solutions for somebody who's been sourcing goods outside of the U.S., small business, would you recommend looking inside the U.S.? Or do you feel like there's a time frame I can tell? She was asking me all these things, time frame of other legislation that's going on outside of the executive orders?
Yeah, well, I hope I'm getting a free haircut out of all this advice you're giving.
I know, right? Right. She holds a lot of power, Kate, when she's got my hair in her hands.
You don't want to tick her off. I get it. I think what I've heard a lot of people say is that you need to, and it's tougher for a small business, but I do think you can't have all your eggs in one basket, right? Like maybe you look to source domestically as well as continue to find solutions that help to continue to use, because in some cases there aren't necessarily domestic options just yet. I mean, it might be down the road, but so I think a lot of people said you have to look to vary your suppliers, look to use more than one service provider, perhaps. But I think when you're a small business, it's hard because all of those things come at a cost. And one of the other things that I read, which is if you're a big retailer like Walmart, you have the leverage to kind of lean on your suppliers to demand that that they eat some of that cost of the tariff. But but that just means that supplier is going to seek that cost, that squeeze somewhere else, and that's usually the small and mid-sized business. So it's just going to be a tough, and I think things. Hopefully, we will. I I don't know. You hate to say you hate for the economy to the blips that are occurring in the economy to kind of be the wake up call, but I kind of hope it is. I hope some of these tariffs get either lifted or reduced or are done a little more strategically because you're right. It's sort of been like the napalm blast, and while some can sort of weather it, others are having a hard time figuring out how to adjust quickly because they're just not in that business. I mean, she's not in the supply chain business. She's in the business of selling a product that she needs something from another part of the world. So I don't know. I don't think I have an answer for that one.
Again, like you said earlier, if you had the answers, you and we'd be up leading the world or something.
Yeah,
We'd be a lot higher pay grade than we are if we
for
had some of
sure.
these answers.
For sure.
Okay, so final question. We're running late on time. I think that you've given us a lot of the same sort of insights of we're kind of living in a world of uncertainty right now. Maybe, do some risk management. I love how you said don't have all your eggs in one basket. I also loved how you said lean on others, lean on partners you've got, look for technology, look for people like trade organizations who can kind of keep an eye on what's going on for you, try to stay updated and know what's going on. I had one last question. So are there legislative pieces that are going on right now that we should be aware of in terms of de minimis?
This is a new Congress, right? So there was legislation that was introduced in the previous Congress, which was the 118th Congress. And what happens with Congress is when a Congress ends, so the 118th ended in December, any legislation that was introduced, even if it made it all the way through a committee in the House, it has to be reintroduced in the new Congress. And I don't think we've had anything to date introduced around de minimis and actually customs modernization, but I know it is of interest, and we are likely to see something. And I wanted to it reminds me, we talked about making your voice heard. That's another thing to do. And this is actually a really good thing. She needs to reach out to her member of Congress and just let them know, because frankly, Congress. A lot of these things are being done with executive orders, which some would argue and maybe even legally challenge that certain things need to be done legislatively. Like Congress is the one that makes the laws. So you really want to reach out to your member of Congress and let them know. And if you can, get a meeting with them. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we've just had a webinar with. I've had a webinar with my members where we talked about how Congress works and the importance of reaching out because they need to hear from small businesses and I forget what percentage, most of businesses in America are small businesses. So I think that's really key. And even if you don't even have to go in there and say the word de minimis. You just have to say, I am getting absolutely hammered by what's going on. And it just resonates. And those are the kinds of things that will help to shape legislation.
I absolutely agree. So tons of fantastic advice from you here today, Kate. I know it's a volatile world right now and it's chaos and we're all figuring out what to do. But I think you had some really solid advice. Look at your plan. Don't have your eggs in one basket. Make your voice heard. Keep informed. All of those are really great, and you've provided us some good insight on what's going on with de minimis. Helped me understand a little bit that it's kind of been separated from the tariffs, and so when that comes back in April, that's not going to affect de minimis for now. So thank you so much for being here. This was fantastic. Everyone, please give us your insights. If you do have a story, please share with us. We'd love to hear from you. And hopefully you're hanging in through all of this craziness that's going on. And Kate, again, thank you. And we will see you all next time.